This past Sunday, President Biden took to the pulpit at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, which I'm sure most of you are aware. That's the former church of slain civil rights pioneer Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's also the current church of Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock. Now, many of you may know me as a former congressman and now working with the Family Research Council, but I'm also a former pastor of almost 30 years. I don't know, I've probably have preached thousands of sermons in my lifetime. So I thought it would be very helpful to invite a fellow minister of the gospel to join the program with me now to break down the president's sermon. And I think this is going to be eye-opening on many fronts. So joining me now to discuss this is Virgil Walker. He's the Executive Director of Operations for G3 Ministries and is also co-host of the podcast Just Thinking. Virgil, welcome back to Washington Watch. It's an honor to have you back, my friend.
It's an honor to be with you. Thanks for having me, Jody.
Well, it's a great honor to have you. Listen, before we get into specifics, just give me your overall thoughts on the president's message on Sunday.
The president's message on Sunday, I think probably the first thing that struck me was just the apparent, it was apparent even during the introduction with Warnock that this was more of an ecumenical service. Warnock admitted that the president was, a practicing Catholic. So it was odd to me that you had this practicing Catholic who was, providing a sermon to a Protestant church on the Lord's Day. I think it might have been consistent to have a president speak on Monday, on the MLK day, or on another day of the week, but to have him speaking and to give the Sunday morning service message was just a bit odd. Add to that none of the words that he shared or talked about, it was absolutely devoid of any gospel proclamation. It was devoid of anything that we would recognize from a standpoint of the Christian faith. It was more attached to the social gospel, which is something that Dr. King preached. It was something that was originated by Walter Rauschenbusch. You had more of this social gospel and this idea about a utopia that could be brought about if we all just came together and joined hands in unity, more like a Coke commercial from days of old than anything related to the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Those are really some good observations. The pastor of the church is Senator Warnock, who, as we all know, is extremely explicit in his support of the abortion industry. But during the speech or sermon, whatever you want to call it, President Biden talked about Dr. King's moral vision. Right. And Dr. King's path. I want to get your reaction to this, but let me play this clip for you.
We gather to contemplate his moral vision and to commit ourselves to his path, the path that leads to the beloved community, to the sacred place, that sacred hour when justice rains down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream.
Look, I think we all understand we need moral vision these days. I mean, we have lost our moral compass in this country. But what was Dr. King's moral vision? What was he referring to?
I think really what we've witnessed is King had a desire, and he wrote a letter to his wife, Coretta, to speak about the gospel that he would preach. And that gospel included a redistribution of wealth, the idea that there would be no more war and that people would get along with one another, regardless of the basis of the color of their skin. Now, of those visions, the idea behind bringing those things about had little to do, again, with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the reason for that is King did not believe, he did not affirm the deity of Christ. He did not affirm the resurrection of Christ. He did not affirm the virgin birth. He did not affirm a literal hell. So his gospel was a gospel-less gospel. It had everything to do with just this moral ideals, and those were brought about primarily by political force and thought. And so what the president was alluding to is really for him in this day. It's more of what the Democratic Party has paid for us. One where we amplify ideas around social justice. We amplify ideas that really cause division through the promotion of CRT in schools. Whether it's the destruction of marriage. I know they call it the Respect for Marriage Act, but it's more the Disrespect for Marriage Act. That's the path. Those are the pathways that the Democratic Party is now advancing. And unfortunately, as I watch the midterm elections, that's primarily what Black churches that I'm experiencing here in Georgia are promoting. I watched Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock advance this cause throughout Black churches here in Georgia. And it was a sad commentary for where the Bible instructs us to be and where Dr. King's current vision, based upon those who are advancing his cause, desire for us to be.
Well, you're giving some information I'm sure that many of our viewers and listeners right now are kind of shocked to hear with the moral vision and what it's kind of morphed into, it seems, as a political vision at this point in terms of what the president was talking about. But besides the moral vision was the path. All right, I think that the discussion on the path here is also important for us to kind of wrap our brains around what is being referred to here. So what thoughts do you have on this path that the president says we need to commit to?
Yeah, it's a path committed, unfortunately, especially in this historically African-American church. It's a path that keeps Blacks primarily hitched as with their wagons to a Democratic Party that really has not meant well for them, has not helped them in any way, shape, or form. All of what they promote and preach requires dependency upon government rather than independency, rather than autonomy away from government, so that we can do more of on our own. It's a path that really, in my estimation, based upon the moral issues of marriage, of family, of what we talked about earlier with regard to the issue of abortion, all of those paths based upon this current path that the Democratic Party would have us to be on lead to the absolute destruction of the family unit as we know it. And this is something that Black churches, Black families in particular, again, where he was, I recognize on MLK Day he was speaking to the nation, but it was primarily aimed at a historically Black church for the purpose of delivering to them a message that he believed would resonate with them. And this is one that we have got to get off of the path. Blacks primarily and Americans as a whole need to walk away from a path that leads us to dependency on Democratic platform issues.
Well, any path that leads us to dependency upon government at all. But listen, I can't tell you how much I'm appreciating this discussion and the insight that you bring to the table here.
Thank you.
And of course, President Biden said that Dr. King's mission was spiritual and moral. That's good and fine. But the goal of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was to redeem so-called the soul of America. And that's a term the president has used often. Again, here's a clip I want to play and get your reaction to.
Sure.
What is the soul of America? Easy to say, but what is the soul of America? Well, the soul is the breath, the life, the essence of who we are. The soul makes us us. The soul of America is embodied in the sacred proposition that we're all created equal in the image of God.
The president cited what's commonly known as the golden rule from Matthew 22 and Luke 10, where Jesus said, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then he says you should love your neighbor as yourself. Right. But let me hear your thoughts on this whole concept of the soul of America. What's your reactions to that?
My initial reaction is one of great grief, because there's no political party or no movement that can redeem a soul. If we're serious about soul winning only happens through the proclamation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when you get up on a Sunday morning at a church and preach a gospel-less message, and you turn a message into a failed movement, we've got problems. That's the first part of my thought. The second component of that is The Democratic Party, Warnock in particular, and primarily Black churches have leaned into the idea of abortion. This was foreign for decades to Black culture. But again, King comes along, and while he didn't advocate abortion per se, he did receive the Margaret Sanger Award, the person who started Planned Parenthood. King was the first one to receive that award. And so it's not surprising that through King's leadership, through his acceptance, his validation of Margaret Sanger's eugenics work, her racist eugenics work, that masses of Black people began to embrace the ideas surrounding Planned Parenthood. When you talk about loving your neighbor, when you talk about caring for the soul of America, we've got to stop. And the first priority that we should have is caring for our neighbor that's in the womb, caring for the least of these that is in the womb. If we can't start there, understanding what life is, understanding our need for care for those who are most vulnerable in the womb, then we've got problems connecting any other facet of a message.
Wow, you are so spot on. And yeah, let's again, and I apologize for having so many clips, but I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to see and to hear what the president had to say. But regarding the loving the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind, and strengthening your neighbor as yourself, here's what the president had to say about those verses.
But in that commandment, in my view, lies the essence of the gospel and the essence of the American promise. It's when we see each other as neighbors and not enemies that progress and justice come. It's when we see each other as fellow human beings, as children of God, that we begin to walk the path of Dr. King's beloved community. A path his dream inspired and whose legacy propel us forward to this day.
Wow. Yeah, look, you and I would both agree those are awesome verses that we have of Jesus, but they were about the law. Jesus said, these fulfill the law. And these verses are not the essence of the gospel. The gospel is about Jesus Christ and his redemptive death and burial, resurrection for us, for our sins. And so this whole thing is just taking another twist to reality. Your thoughts on it?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, when he presents the gospel and then gives us the law is something we couldn't keep, and the fact that we had the law points us to our need for the message of the gospel, the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sin. Add to that, he connected that promise and those words of Christ to the goal of America. Now what we have is Christian nationalism. Right, we've got Christian nationalism right there in the pulpit at the church. This message that he claimed is the gospel, he's connected to the promise of America. So is America supposed to be giving us a gospel promise of some kind? The only way that happens is if he, as the president of the United States, believes himself to be the savior. And that's what we have happening in our churches. Every person in that church should have got up and walked out if they loved God. That's what they should have done upon hearing this false message that had nothing to do with the Christian gospel.
Wow, Virgil, listen, when you were just saying that, it reminded me, there is a religious nature to the left-wing ideology. I recall being on the House floor, I don't know, sometime this past year, and Speaker Pelosi literally referred to the House chamber as the temple. Like a political temple, I believe was her expressions, instead of the people's house, instead of a place of debate, using religious terminology to describe the people's house. Are we seeing, I mean, you talk about this Christian nationalism, are we seeing almost a religious creation being developed out of left-wing ideology?
Well, the left have no, but first of all, let me say this. What we're seeing with the social justice movement, with the CRT and its advance, with the LGBTQIA plus agenda as it relates to issues of marriage and the redefining of marriage, this is a religion. This is a religious cause, and they will stop at no turn to enshrine these ideas into our minds and into every facet of our culture and life. They want their religion to be codified into law, so that no one can stop what it is they're doing, and people can either be fined or imprisoned for debating or for arguing or for even having the thoughts that differ from their own. So this is very much a religion. And what you're seeing happening in the language that you spoke of with Speaker Pelosi and the language that we're hearing from the president is the marrying of those ideas. The left have no problem with Christian nationalism so long as they're able to set the agenda.
Well, Virgil Walker, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the program and helping to unfold this message that the president gave at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Your insight is extremely valuable, and we need to make sure that we don't get twisted up on terminology. But thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jody.